ANC Secretary General Fikile Mbalula says the government must make sure that the new budget protects the most vulnerable. He says the ANC supports the decision to withdraw the budget, although they believe it was a good one. Mbalula also says no one should take credit for the withdrawal, as it happened after talks with other parties. Political analyst Asanda Ngoasheng joins us live to discuss. The new budget, Ms. Ngoasheng, must make sure that whoever draws it up, they must make sure that it protects the most vulnerable. This is from the man who runs the leading party in the government of national unity. I don't know what you make of that statement to begin with.
Well, I think the ANC has maintained, for quite a while that they were one of the organizations that was against the VAT increase. And so if you were to ask them, they'd probably argue that they've said that they were against the VAT increase. It's not a new thing, because you must remember that the budget is done not necessarily from ANC headquarters, but it's done from Treasury. And then from Treasury, the ruling government or the governing party then has some influence over what ends up being pushed. And so, of course, it does sound contradictory when you don't understand the system. But of course, there is some semblance of a lie there's some semblance of truth, and of course, some lie, in the sense that if the ANC really didn't want a budget that had a VAT increase, they could have stopped it before it got to Parliament. And so one of the things that's very interesting, I think, that's emerging out of this whole debacle is that, number one, we're beginning to have a clearer sense of what is the role of Treasury in the budget system and what is the role of the party that actually governs, whether it's the ANC or not. And then what is the role of the political parties outside of the governing party, and what influence each of the different players has, including South Africans, by the way, because while the DA, the EFF, and everybody who's had a press conference has claimed this as a victory, one can argue that while they all acted and had a hand in pushing against the VAT, South Africans, ordinary South Africans, by speaking out, by making statements and making their opinions heard and pushing back against this budget, also had an impact in the fact that in the end it eventually did not come to pass.
But I mean, there's just so many things confusing people here. Right from the start, we got to hear or pick up that there were people within the ANC, senior leaders of the ANC, some of whom are in the executive, who said, you simply cannot do that, not under the current circumstances. And one of them was actually a minister I spoke to on the show some time ago when we were talking about NERSA and what Eskom was asking for at the time. And he said it without even thinking twice about it, that under the current atmosphere, with everything that people are facing in South Africa, especially the poor, there is no way you can give Eskom what it was asking for. Now, fast forward to how this budget was put together, and the conversations we're told happened behind the scenes, and the fact that Enoch Godongwana still went ahead or was ready to announce not 0.5, not 1.5, 2 percentage point increase. You ask yourself what happened along the way. And even when that was pointed out, you then ask yourself again, right, why would they go to the wall, on this? I can list, all the things up all the way to what actually happened a couple of weeks ago, up to where we are. I say, but something is definitely missing, which brings me, after my long question, to the question. Question was asked today whether people had learned lessons, whether we're talking about the Finance Minister, whether we're talking about the ANC, and they say they have, but everything that was said afterwards didn't suggest they have.
Well, I think there definitely would have to be lessons. There'd have to be kind of dead as people, never mind as a party, for them to not learn any lessons. But I think, it's important for people to understand the budgeting system itself and how budgets come to be. Because if you don't understand the budgeting system itself and how budgeting comes to be, then this doesn't make sense. And the first thing that I think a lot of South Africans get confused with is to mistake the state, as in the government and the institutions and administrative arm of government, for the ruling ANC. So the ANC is the biggest political party in parliament. That means that they have a huge influence on policy. That means that there's a lot that they can do to shift policy and to shift how decisions are made. But they are still beholden unto the government institutions and infrastructure. And there is something that South Africa has always kind of done its best to be, unlike even some of what are seen as the best countries in the world, although we're seeing that there's no such thing these days with what's happening in America. But there is a sense in which the ANC government was very clear, or has done its best so far, to try to give Treasury a certain kind of independence. And so if you look at the ways in which Treasury moves, if you look at the ways in which the central bank moves, if you look at the ways in which the entire kind of financial infrastructure of South Africa moves, a lot of the time, it actually sometimes moves in ways that a lot of ANC people are critical of. And in fact, the ANC has said many, many times that they feel that at times Treasury stands in the way of some of the radical actions that they want to take towards changing this economy. But they've also clarified that the reason why they continue to try and allow Treasury to have this level of independence, even when they feel it hurts them, is because from an investor perspective, from a kind of global economics perspective.
But you can't throw your hands up in the air if you are a governing party with the mandate to rule, which has been the case for the longest time, and up until, of course, in the last election on May 29. By now, 30 years down the line, they ought to have fixed that. You're correct. And the alliance partners were also part of those conversations. Civil society organizations have been raising this issue for the longest time. But no one took it upon themselves, or should I say, the ANC didn't take it upon itself to actually fix what they too identified as a problem. So someone was sleeping on the job. Is it not fair to make that argument?
This is, I'm not making an argument. I'm simply trying to explain this, because this is one of the issues, and has been one of the issues with the ANC, that they have a huge mandate, and sometimes they don't exercise the power that they do have to the extent that they can. And they themselves have, I think, their own fears about how radical transformation they can go, about how far they can go in exercising their power. And I think this whole budgeting system and everything that has happened here is an example of how much power they have, and they have allowed themselves to not use, and the extent to which Treasury, as in the administrative arm, has high influence on the economy and how the economy is run in South Africa. And this is one of the weaknesses of the ANC, and has been challenged by, as you said, the alliance partners and even others within the ANC themselves. I think when I try to understand whatever it is, as I've said, is that it is one of those situations where one is caught between a rock and a hard place, in the sense that you've got the global economy, which says these are the principles and these are the ways in which you run. And then you've got, the work of government, and the fact that South Africans have trusted the ANC to be the ones that are pushing for more radical action, pushing for more I don't think even radical is the right word, but for a different way of pursuing economics and a different way of engaging with this economy. Because if they don't engage in a different way with this economy, we are going to continue to talk about apartheid beneficiaries. We are going to continue to talk about the legacy of apartheid in our financial institutions. And 30 years, you are right, is too long a time for them to not have overhauled the system and try to bring something that is closer to the economic infrastructure and the fiscal policy and governance that South Africa needs in order to enter the true post-apartheid state. Because for now, we are still very much within the structures of a lot of what apartheid left in terms of infrastructure. We haven't quite entered the post-apartheid era. And this is the argument that a lot of people have made, from political ideologists to economists themselves.
Asanda Ngoasheng, let's leave it there. For today, the ANC, of course, the ANC Secretary General, at pains at that media briefing, trying to again emphasize a point they made last week, that no one, or if anyone, should take credit for what has happened. It is the ANC and the other 10 political parties that went with it, and that he says are responsible for what we have seen. Of course, that doesn't stop the Democratic Alliance and the EFF from also taking credit, saying if it wasn't for us, we would be having a VAT increase of at least 0.5%. Well, while the issue of who should and shouldn't take credit continues, we are going to leave that matter here for at least this afternoon.